I want to hold up this document. We had a prayer this morning about this constitutions and statutes, and you've been hearing them referred to as the rule. They're the rule of life for the professed members of the family. So most of us are not bound to, and they're not the rule of life for most of us in this room. However, I'm firmly convinced that if we are to share in this redemptorist spirituality, this Christian spirituality played out in a redemptorist key, then we need to know what's in here. It doesn't all apply to us in the sense that it directs our life, but it does inspire our connection. And so I really do believe that anybody who's going to get closely connected and maintain closely connected needs to have a more than glancing familiarity with the constitutions and statutes. So we're going to start today, and it's a start. It's like a baby step. So this is the book. You don't have to eat it. Doesn't taste really good. Okay, so we're going to walk step by step through a few of the constitutions and just kind of see what they say to us. And we're going to do it reflectively. It's not an academic course. Somewhere along the way I had to actually do a course in the constitutions and statutes of the Redemptorists. It was with Ray Corriveau. And it was the best. I had a ball. I loved doing it. We would do it in Sudbury up in my office like a couple of days a week. And it was the best introduction because he's someone who kind of lived it and embodied it. So it was fantastic. So that's my key to this is it might guide, the Constitution and Statutes guide the lives of professed Redemptorists, but they inspire the lives of partners in mission. Okay? And if at any point here there's something you don't understand or have a question about, just say it. Because if you have a question, 20 people have the same question. Right? And there are no dumb questions, but there are really dumb answers. Okay? So I want to talk about the way the constitutions and statutes are put together, because that in itself is a key to the spirituality. There are 6 chapters to the constitutions and statutes. And the first one is mission. That says something right there. What does it say? Like how would you interpret that? If you were writing a letter to a friend, where do you put the most important thing? Right at the beginning, unless you want to hide it for some reason and buried it at the end, right? But the most important thing, the thing you most want to convey, is usually right at the beginning. So the first chapter is the missionary work of the congregation. And you can see what some of the topics are. But it's enough to know that the Constitution and Statutes begin with the mission. And so do we. Right? It all comes down to mission. The second chapter is about apostolic community. Now, Redemptorists live it, and the partners in mission share it. Right? But we're called to be inspired by this thing that it's not about me, it's about us, and mostly it's about Jesus working with and through us to accomplish this great work of redemption. Okay? So the way chapter 2 describes the apostolic community, we're going to come back to, but it's really important. A community of the presence of Christ is in the midst. First of all, starts with Christ. It's a community of prayer, of people, real people with real stuff going on, of work, of conversion. It's an open community, and it's organized. So those are key kind of inspiring principles. So far, so good? We'll come back to all of it. Chapter 3 is about the apostolic community dedicated to Christ the Redeemer. Right? So the Christological, we used that word before, Christological. We talked about, Peter talked about Gerard Magella as having a profoundly Christological spirituality. So must we. Right? If we're going to take principles from the lives of our saints, that's a good one to take. Right? That our living of this community and our spreading of this community has to have a profoundly Christological basis. Right? So in there is where you find that section that some of you have been so inspired by already. Everyone's a missionary is a key thing. No matter what your work, the mission is bigger than the work. Right? Ministries are just one thing, one thing, one thing. The mission is a bigger thing, right? So that's a key thing, and we're all missionaries, whether we're actively working, employed or not, whether we are sick, even dying. That's still an active missionary participation. Chapter 4 is formation. That will look different for partners in mission than it will for the professed redemptorists. And then the governance stuff, which Van has been asking all kinds of questions about, how it's all put together. Who's who, what's what, who lives where, who does what, how long are the terms, all that. Okay, that's probably the least applicable in some ways, but it matters to us, right? So we'll start with Constitution 1. And I'm going to try to zero in on what I think is the most inspiring stuff. You don't have to think the same thing. Right? You can have a different idea. But I think it's the purpose in Constitution 1. Why are we here at all? Right? I think it's this: to follow the example of Jesus Christ the Redeemer. How? By preaching the word of God to the poor. And we know the passage by heart now. As he said of himself, he sent me to preach the good news to the poor. Today we're using other words: abandoned, wounded. But it's all about proclaiming the good news, and it's the good news of plentiful redemption. Okay? The second Constitution, Constitution number 2, has one phrase that I think it's absolutely key for us. One missionary body. Not just one body. The church is one body. We are called to be one missionary body dedicated to proclaiming the good news to the poor and the abandoned, or the abandoned, especially the materially poor. Constitution 3. Then, who are the abandoned? Like the perennial question. Right? So see how this sits for you. And the question now becomes, for the lay people involved, the Redemptorists too, but for the lay people here, do you get an echo? It's like, when anybody ever go for a heart test and have an echocardiogram? Right? They try to find out whether there's damage or whether your heart is healthy by the way things sound, and it makes pictures. That's the idea. So does this have an echo in you? The most abandoned, to whom in particular we are sent, are those for whom the church has not yet been able to provide sufficient means of salvation. Those who are abandoned by the church for some reason. Church hasn't been able to provide for them, hasn't been able to reach them. Can you see where you fit? That's where our analogy of fingers is helpful. Right? There are places, there are kitchens, there are holes in the wall, there are all kinds of fields, literal fields and figurative ones that lay people can get, that we need to kind of be working together with Redemptorists to do this evangelization in a meaningful way. 2, those who have never heard the church's message, or at least do not receive it as good news. Now, I want you to keep in mind one thing. It's going to sound, for anybody who knows anything about what Pope John Paul II called the new evangelization, it's going to sound an awful lot like what he called the new evangelization. But this is long before Pope John Paul II. So very interesting, hey? And finally, those who suffer harm because of division in the church. So those who've been hurt because of divisions in the church, those who've been abandoned because of some issues within local or wider communities. Right? And then, never forget those faithful who need ordinary pastoral care. The people who are out there every Sunday, the joiners, the comers, they matter too. Right? It's the abandoned and all the others, right, who we want to help form into missionary disciples to reach the others with us. Clement's idea of a parish as a permanent mission, a perpetual mission, is a brilliant innovation for today. Because what's our purpose is to get all those people who are here. Pope Francis talks about it all the time. To not just stay here, but get out of here at the end and say, we are missionary disciples called to these very same people. Right? The work starts when we leave the doors. There's a great picture I've seen of of a church somewhere, and it might be one of these urban myths that David talks about, but that the exit sign actually says entrance. I like it, right? I like the idea. Constitution 4. So we're all under mission, but these are going to be really key things. The line is that we give special attention to the poor, the deprived, and the oppressed. And we all know, as we said yesterday, that all the prisons don't have bars, and all the forms of oppression are not just the slavery we know, right? So the thing is that while this is what Redemptorists dedicate their lives to and actually commit themselves to, we're being asked to be inspired by it. And the key question, I think, for us when we think about call is it already happening in your life? This is not the start of something. There needs to be I think if we're going to say we're Redemptorist associates, this has to be where the echo, it's already there. It's already happening, right? And the association then feeds you to keep on and do it with renewed vigor and renewed strength. Constitution 5. Now this is really, we're starting to get some really key and picky things, but really important. Preference is given to situations where there's pastoral need. That is, evangelization in the strict sense, like the explicit proclamation of the word, together with the choice in favor of the poor. It's about plentiful redemption. This idea that God is never stingy. Right? That God's love is overflowing. God's mercy is overflowing, and so should ours be. God's compassion is overflowing. There's no this door is closed with God. You know, when I do baptism prep, you got to imagine this is happening. But you know, when people get anointed at baptism, if you've ever done RCIA, I know Mickey has, all kinds of people do stingy symbols. And they think that oil is the symbol, and it's not. Symbols are never things. So when you think about the symbol of anointing with oil, we're used to little bits of oil so that the baptism dress doesn't get ruined, right? But really, the picture of that is wine or oil overflowing and pouring out, because it's supposed to symbolize God's love and mercy and compassion and forgiveness and acceptance and belonging, all that. So what we always do in baptism prep is get lots of oil and lots of paper towels and get people to rub it into their hands, get the oil, dip it, and now just imagine just do it yourself and imagine that that's cooking oil, right? Can you rub it off? No, you'll never rub it off. It only goes deeper. That's why it's so important to have lots of oil, because it's God. The anointing with oil is the symbol of God getting in there. And God, you can say, God, get out of my life, but God's going nowhere. Right? That's not happening. You can say all you like, but God's going nowhere. And that's what we have to proclaim, that we're the face and the hands and the feet and the love and the arms and the helping organize the food or whatever it is that proclaims plentiful redemption. That God's gone nowhere, honey. What's it? Someone said that God only goes as far away as the human heart, and that's very close, right? Making sense. Like, does that sound like you? Right? Yeah. There's no. You can't come in here with God. Right? I never go any further than that oil. It's just rubbing deeper and deeper. You can rub it off all you like, but that just means I'm getting closer. Right? Then, this then is true. Because as the mission is the explicit proclamation of the Word of God, this good news of plentiful redemption, what happens when you can't do it? When, let's say it's my niece, who comes to my house on a regular basis, just got married, wanted me to read at her wedding, but I had to read a poem called What is Love at the local bar. What if it's that? Do I say no? No. I was there. I'm her aunt. I love her. I'll be there. And when the time is right, I might get to talk about God with her. Maybe. And if not, she knows God. She knows the love and the plentiful redemption of God, even if she can't put the same words on it I do. So that's the same thing that Constitution 8 calls redemptorists too. That according to the situation in which they find themselves, they'll eagerly try to discover what they should do or say. Right? Mass is not the answer to everything. It's a good answer, but what if the question's not that, right? Yeah. Whether to proclaim Christ explicitly or confine themselves to the silent witness of brotherly or sisterly presence. Right? So sometimes redemptorists are not explicitly proclaiming the good news. Why? Because it's not the right thing to do, it's not the right place to do it, it's not the right time to do it. And so then what do? You give witness. You do what I do with my niece, right? And you do it too, in all kinds of ways. Maybe it's that you're in a situation where politically it's not safe to do it. What do? You do your best to proclaim good news with the way you live your life, right? And then when the time is right, you try to figure out how you do the explicit piece. I think about you, Chris, because you're smiling down there. You work with prisoners. It's not always the right time to say, now here's what Jesus wants. Right? Or I'm going to read you Luke 4. Right? It's not always the right time, but it's always the right time to be the oil, right? To be loving, sometimes tough love, to open doors, offer opportunities for employment for these guys coming out of prison who have such a hard time doing it, finding meaningful and appropriate social supports. That's good news, isn't it? And that's plentiful redemption. I think about what you told us this morning at breakfast, Annette, about your work as a foster parent, right? Nowhere in the Constitutions and statute does it say go be a foster parent. But think about the plentiful redemption that you have proclaimed through your welcome of so many kids with so many mental health issues over the years. If that's not proclaiming plentiful redemption, and then I'm sure that there were times in those lives when it was right to talk about Jesus, and it was right to talk about God, or morality, or how to treat one another, or whatever. So that's what this is about as it applies in our lives. It's how it applies to redemptorist lives too. Right? But what it calls us to, I mean, are you getting the idea? Yeah, okay. So most of us will never sit down and read the constitutions and statutes cover to cover. But once in a while, if you get a copy, they're online too, and just read one and say, wow. Especially in chapter 1. Right? Should circumstances, Constitution 9, make it impossible for us at times to proclaim the gospel directly and immediately or to preach it fully, then the missionaries, now here's the key part, with patience and prudence, but at the same time with great confidence, must give witness to the charity of Christ and do all in their power to make themselves neighbors to everybody. Now think about your life. When you go to the store, I'll tell you a story. A couple of weeks ago, I went to the grocery store. There's a young cashier at Sobeys, which is like the Atlantic Canadian supermarket. There's a girl who was looking a bit like sad, like, you know, you pick up a vibe or something, and she wasn't looking really in great shape that day, and there were bruises all here. I wasn't sure what exactly they were because they weren't fingerprints, but okay. So I said, how was your day? She said, I've been off work for 2 weeks. I said, yeah, I haven't seen you for a while, right? And she said, no, I was recovering. They put me in protective custody because my boyfriend bit my face. And she said, and I finally decided to charge him. So they gave me protective care. I said, well, when is the court date? And she said, it's tomorrow. I said, is there someone, what do you say? I said, is there anybody going to court with you? And she said, oh yeah, they gave me someone who would accompany to court. And she looked at me and said, would you do that? I said, of course, if you need someone to hold your hand, you just ask. But that's what we do, isn't it? Right? That's what we do, to give witness to the charity of Christ. Because that oil that was rubbed into us at baptism didn't go away in us. And what is it supposed to do in us? It's supposed to make us people who proclaim the good news by our lives. And when the time is right, you talk about Jesus. But she didn't need to hear about Jesus that day. She needed someone to say, are you okay? And are you going to be okay tomorrow? Right? Constitution 10. So all this is under mission. And it applies to all of us, but differently to the professed members as it does to the lay partners. When the opportune time comes and the Lord opens the door for them for the preaching of the word, the members are always ready to give witness to the hope that's in them. Now, for us, that doesn't necessarily mean, I'm going to talk about Luke 4. It might mean, do you need someone to go to the courtroom with you? Do you need someone to take the kids for 2 hours while you get a break? Do you need someone to sit with your mother while you go out and get the groceries? That kind of thing, right? It's not always about churchy stuff, but it's all about God stuff and about plentiful redemption. Because, God didn't just make one of us. God made lots so the work could actually get done, right? That the love could actually reach people. They bring to completion the silent witness of their brotherly presence by preaching the mystery of Christ with confidence and constancy. So sometimes I might get to say, like when my phone rings at my desk in the office and someone says, my neighbor told me I can't go to communion because I'm divorced. I said, really? Your neighbor told you that? Yeah. I said, are you remarried? No. Well, there's nothing keeping you from going to communion. Absolutely nothing. And the relief, hey? So sometimes you can actually say something from the rule book or from the Bible that's actually helpful. That's the kind of thing, right, that we're talking about here. Constitution 14, then, says another really key phrase, is that what we do, the apostolic work that we're engaged in, is distinguished more by its missionary dynamism than by any particular form of activity. It's what drives it that's important, right? That we're driven by this overwhelming desire to proclaim the plentiful redemption of Christ that we have known in our own lives, right? I often think back to the day I found out I had a heart condition. And I was told that I might need a heart transplant, which was kind of scary. And I was by myself. I was in a hospital in Regina, and I knew nobody, not one soul in Regina. And so what I did was phone a Redemptorist friend and said, they just told me I might need to have a heart transplant. I can't pray. Nothing would come. And the answer was totally surprising. The answer was, well then, that's okay. You're not supposed to be able to pray. That's why you were baptized. That's so that the rest of us would pray for you today. Wow, hey? That was a missionary activity he did, right? And so are we driven by this desire to proclaim this good news, this drive to get out there and be it? Like I think about some of the works you've told me you're involved in. There's no uniformity to the works, but what there is a uniformity to is that they're driven by this need and desire and love to proclaim plentiful redemption. So far, so good? Okay. The next piece we talked about earlier. We don't do it individually. Although we may be doing it in one at a time in our places, we're not doing it as ones. We're doing it as a community. We do it because we're a church, because we're baptized, and because we're connected to the Redemptorist community, that we're part of this great family. And that even if I'm doing it in the grocery store in St. John's, I know that Mario is doing the same thing in St. Louis de Kent. I know that John is doing the same thing in Chicago. I know that Kathy's doing the same thing in New Smyrna. Right? I'm connected in a great web of a family that's all dedicated to Christ the Redeemer through this family. Christ is the center of our lives. That it's a Christological basis, right? Hard to imagine. It's even hard to imagine anything else, anybody else being the center, but it happens that Christ is really the center of my life, and that my constant reference point is always to him. I think about St. Alphonsus in this regard, because if there's one thing about Alphonsus that actually inspires me and always has, is that he didn't have one moment of conversion. He had like hundreds. And I always picture Alphonsus, this is terrible, and he's going to, like when I get to heaven, he's going to have a word with me about this. But I picture Alphonsus like a sunflower. Someone talked about sunflowers the other day. You know what sunflowers, when they turn their heads? You ever watch them? There's an Irish song about this. There's an Irish song about everything, but usually somebody dies in them. But the sunflower turns every hour of the day. Yeah, it turns to follow the sun. Now, take the U out of sun and put an O in. That's what we're supposed to do, right? Is continually, that's conversion, hey? Continually being not reorienting ourselves, but being reoriented by Christ and by his power in our lives and his action, by our baptism and the living out of the power of that. Constantly more. I think that's Alphonsus' life story, is that there were many moments, Peter talked about it as an exodus, but many moments when he constantly turned more and more to Christ the Redeemer. And I think that's true for us too. If Christ is really the center of our lives, then we're constantly being converted. It's not like it only happened the day of your baptism, although February the 12th, 1961 was a really good day. Not as good as John, though. It wasn't like pivotal and earth-shaking. But for me it was, and I hope for the church. But that was the beginning of a constant conversion to Christ. So that if he's the center of my life, he's always changing me too. And to be attentive to where and how he's calling and in whom is the heart of this section of the Constitutions and Statutes for us, I think. Peter's right when he talks about, I always think he is, but when we talk about this is the source for redemptorist spirituality, this is the best place to go. It's just that it needs to be unpacked for those of us who are not the professed members, and to say, how do we live this out? And contemplation, soaking in God, and asking, where are you sending me next? Right? To see God in the people and the events of everyday life. Seems like a crazy thing to need to put in a constitution, doesn't it? But it says who we are and to whom we're directed. Both to whom we're directed and to whom. Right? The next constitutions we've already talked about. The apostolic community, a community of prayer. So it describes us, not in its every word, but in its frame. A community where we are a community of prayer as a Redemptorist family, a community of persons, a community of work, a community of conversion, an open community, and organized. I'm hoping we can get circles of Redemptorist associates organized. I think organization's not a bad thing. Constitutions 46 and 47. Profession. Religious. What binds the Redemptorist to the congregation is profession. Right? Nobody here, and no layperson, is professed in the community and never will be. What binds us then is what also binds the Redemptorists at an even deeper level. Profession is rooted in baptism. It's our baptism that unites us. And we know that we have experienced this call of Christ because of our baptism into this family. So baptism is the key. It's what unites all of us. And I'd go so far as to say that constitutions are incomplete here. It's not just your baptism. It's your confirmation and the fact that you participate in the Eucharist and are daily or weekly sent forth from the Eucharistic table to bring the Christ you have received to the world. But it's because you're baptized and Christ confirmed in your confirmation. You didn't confirm yourself. Christ confirmed that you were chosen, and then you came to the Eucharistic table and were sent forth and are continually sent forth. It's not just your baptism. It's the fact that you're initiated and that's renewed every time you receive the Eucharist. Constitution 55. all Redemptorists are truly missionaries. Profession makes all Redemptorists missionaries. So it's our baptism that sends us forth. And I think that's all I wanted to do with the constitutions and statutes. But what I do need to ask is, how's that sit? How are you with all that? That's like a whirlwind tour through the constitutions and statutes, and what I think, but it's only what I think, is the spirit of it. What do you think? Where are you with it all? In a short and inspiring reflection of less than 7 sentences, Francis.
But to reach the unchurched, to reach those on the margins of society, to reach the nuns, which is the acronym now for
no religion.
No religion, right? We haven't been able to really know how to respond. And I see this happening, this movement of the Holy Spirit, this collaboration, this partisan mission, as one way that God the Holy Spirit, if not the most significant, is going to thrust us somehow to be able to go out where we haven't been, and to go to where the church's message isn't reaching.
That sometimes the partners in mission do. But then that's half the equation, right? That we often, and you too, are the silent witnesses in those places until the time's right for some kind of explicit proclamation. And then it might be that we're the ones who first proclaim, the lay people, the plentiful redemption, but sometimes we're actually going to bring people to a church or to a professed redemptorist. It might not always be in a church either, right? But wherever we are, you can no longer say they are unchurched. If we're there, the church is there, right? Yeah, I really believe that if we are there, the church is there. And so we are those hands, and I really think about fingers a lot. It might be a bad analogy again, but it allows Redemptorists to get places they might not normally and reach those people who are abandoned, are on the periphery, are the throwaways of society, and be there with them, accompany them, maybe call you to be there too. Now, not that you can do that for us too, but then when the time is right, maybe bring them somewhere, introduce them to somebody. I think you're on to something. I really believe that. Tat.
I don't think we communicate well enough to dialogue. What is your abandoned groups?
Yeah.
What do I need? Can we negotiate? Can we dialogue? Now, I think we're talking about the priorities. That's another priority. That's a redemptorist called pastoral plan. Now, redemptorists, are we willing to listen to the lay missionaries' priorities? And then how can we work together so that we have the common maybe priorities? You know what I mean? Because if you stand in here and ask people to work for you or with you to accomplish your priorities, which is good, but most of the time, very unsuccessful. And right now we have so many unchurched, and they scatter everywhere. And so I would love to hear from you and see what is your priorities and what do you think that the most abandoned right now among you, and how can we work with you to make it more real and more successful? Because if not, we're caught up in whole diocesan priorities.
But I'm going to suggest to you that your apostolic priorities are never going to be anything different than Constitution 3. You might be more specific, but your priorities are always going to fall within Constitution 3. If they don't, there's a real dialogue needed. So somewhere they do.
I just think the whole vision of plentiful redemption is just gorgeous, because when you're working with people and you're talking to people, you're offering them hope. And the hope is what gets them engaged and moving forward and going, man, I got to recheck this whole thing about my spiritual life. Because, when I needed help, Anne went to court with me. And so I just think it's a gorgeous, gorgeous charism. And it's such a gift.
And I think it's enough today to ask ourselves, I really do think this is a beginning, hey, for many of us. It's not a beginning for some, but it's a beginning for a lot. And I think the key question today is there an echo? Does this fit where you've already sensed you're called? I think back to David, when David said that the Mangan Credit Union began in their, operated for a while from the basement, and that his dad was involved. I mean, David might tell you that his first sense of call was through the Redemptorist family, but I bet you his dad and that connection was a huge piece of that call. So does this ring true? Do you find an echo in some of these key things that we've been pulling out this morning? That's enough now. Yeah, Lee.
But what I wanted to say as an echo regarding your question is that as they were being read, images of people in my congregation were popping up, because I know their ministry and their mission. And I'm telling you, I got so excited because they would feel so blessed to have that named and connected with the Redemptorists. And I know they're doing that. They would be willing, and it's very exciting to see that connection already and people that you know that are out there with the abandoned.
Yes, that's exactly it. The way you know it's a call is if you have already sensed something, maybe didn't put words around it, didn't have a lot of form for it, but I can remember the first time I read Raymer May, now this big biography of St. Alphonsus. I just knew this is where I wanted to be, and there was no way there was anything there for a woman in those days, and all I could do was cry, because how's that even possible? This is crazy. But as time goes on, and my version of the vow and oath of perseverance, and I think the Redemptorist too, it came true. I think the key is that you have that sense, that longing, that it tugs on your heart, and you know it fits. Doesn't matter yet how. Right? That it's there is the most important thing right now. Right? Joe.
Getting to meet people in your community is one thing. The other thing is finding those who are comfortable and articulate enough to go out. You can present your idea to them of, let's go out and do this. And they say, yeah, okay, but then they come to learn. There's a lot of work. I don't think I'm confident enough. And that's one of the stumbling blocks. Another one is when you have a pastor that you might get a pastor who is not supportive of this idea at all. What are your plans? Well, I don't think that's going to work. Well, why are you meeting here this evening? We need this room for something else. There are so many things that prevent us from doing this, and the more times that you're shut down, the less you're going to attempt to do it.
Certainly. And Joe, that's, to go back to a previous conversation, that's why it's so important. One thing, if we've learned, I think there's millions of things we've learned. One of the things is that it's not just that Redemptorists need to be formed to be Redemptorists, that lay people need to be formed in the Redemptorist charism, that we both need to be formed for collaboration and for mutual support, but for mission. Right? And we've not done that before, and there's no blame or guilt to that. We're learning. It's an evolving process of foundation. This Redemptorist family is growing, like any good family does, but it's probably not growing quite in the sense that most people would have thought of. And that's okay. God's in the middle of it somehow, and God's in charge.